kind of level in World Health Organization, and then suggesting that it's helpful to have a safety margin of 5 dBA, which is.
Do you have a copy of that? Could you?
Well, that was
refresh my memory on how that's used in the World Health Organization.
Oh, well, yeah, the language is basically, I'm quoting here, above 55 dBA, it says, adverse health effects occur frequently. A sizable proportion of the population is highly annoyed and sleep disturbed. There is evidence that the risk of cardiovascular disease increases. And then I basically say to minimize the risk of possible adverse health impacts, basically adopt 50 dBA. So I would suggest we could insert that in this discussion on the level between 40 and 55 and move the annoyance stuff into this more literature review.
I've often said that 50 is kicking the can down the road. I think there's evidence that levels below that can still cause significant concerns in significant numbers of people. Even without all this business of peer-reviewed literature, we know that there are complaints of people all over the world who live near wind turbines, too close to wind turbines.
Yeah, but that's
this discussion reminds me, frankly, John, of the FAA in the 50s and 60s when it decided the government would advocate for the airline industry and also advocate for the people.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is basically the rules that were established were put in place. The government protected the industry more than it protected the people, and I'm afraid that's what we're about to do.
Gee, I don't see it that way. I tell you how I see it. You know, if you have a wind developer, basically, if they can't make a project work in a community, I mean, Duke Energy goes down the street, goes to a different township or a different state, you know. They're not really, from my perspective, significantly harmed. The individual that's harmed is the property owner who may have wanted to lease their land. And so we're talking about governmental regulations that restrict the use of private property. And I think we have to be very careful what's the basis of those restrictions on the use of private property.
You said the people who were harmed are those who decided to lease their land?
Yes.
What about the people who decided not to, who were living close to wind farms?
Well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about what are reasonable standards to protect the non-participants.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, back to Ken's, I
See,
really applaud what Ken...
I'm responding to your protecting industry. I'm not protecting industry. I'm trying to protect the residents who would like to take advantage of this opportunity.
Well, I know, and I know from some documents that were just given to the committee an hour before the meeting from a lawyer that who's representing the wind industry that they would like us to keep this, basically the current standard, perhaps go, I think, a few dB lower. I believe, is it 50 or 45? I have the. But if we say in this statement, a municipality may also wish to consider adopting a level between 40 and 55. You know what the industry is going to fight for. It's going to fight for 55.
Oh, well, they may do that regardless. Right.
And we're not going to help communities if that's the case, in my view. So
well,
I'm just trying to protect communities, give them a little more, specific guidelines. I know that the wind industry has its issues with lowering that number very low.
Let me suggest this is maybe one way to help with that. Since I'm recommending 50 dBA, what if we basically change that language, consider adopting a level between 40 and 50, and basically then I have a paragraph or two to provide my rationale for the 50. And then what we would present it to the communities is, okay, here's the basis for adopting 40 dBA if you'd like. Here's the basis for adopting 50 dBA. You know, some communities might split the difference. Who knows what they might do? But we have given them a range.
Well, 50 in the daytime might be tolerable to a lot of communities. 45 would be more tolerable, I can tell, in the daytime. But 50 at night is not tolerable to a lot of communities, I don't think. If they're close, if the person's close to it.
When you say tolerable, you mean that will bother some people?
Bothersome.
Yeah.
Bothersome.
The community is everybody that...
Well, bother individuals who live near them.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I can't just interject here. So I don't think anybody's going to convince anybody of a specific number. So that's why I presented this concept. Now, Jerry, you don't seem to be totally in love with this concept of having a range of values. So I guess we need to make...
For reasons I've tried to make clear, that if there's a range, then what have we done to help communities make decisions about what levels to tolerate or to allow?
Well, do you have since I don't, and then we have two other members who are not here, I don't see you convincing people.
No, I'm
that
not. I'm not.
So where are we
Yeah.
going then?
Well, we can come out with a generic range. I contend that's not going to be helpful, but if that's the only way we can get to the end of this process, then I certainly am willing to sign off on it if I have to, but I don't like putting my name on it. I'm just making that very clear.
I would prefer a consensus recommendation.
I would too, yeah, very much so. But a consensus recommendation that is not helpful is not very much is not a recommendation. So, I'm not sure why we're even going to change anything if we're going to go with 50. 50 is better than 55, I agree. But there's been so many new projects and complaints since then that it's evident that I think communities need to have more protection than this provides for them if they follow these particular guidelines, the old guidelines. So I've made it clear that that's my view, and I can't be any more clear about it. But on the other hand, I'm not going to sit here always in these meetings and force my views down your throats, because I do want a consensus view, only because I think we need to put something out there. It needs to be a substantive revision, in my view. 40 to 50 is better to me than 40 to 55, but at least we lowered the 55 down to something as a maximum. I still think when you give communities a range, they're going to pick the higher number. The wind industry is going to fight for a higher number and use it.
Well, but a lot of people, in discussions with local leadership planning commissions, people will be advocating for the lower number too, right?
But it's just going to set up more contentious fights and, need for complaint resolution and all of that.
You know,
and I think that in that way would not help.
Yeah, and two, we need to keep in mind we've got a couple of members missing. So what I'd be comfortable with 40 and 50, I'm not sure like Cliff would. Cliff might make a case for.
He's already said he'd be comfortable with 50. I'm not sure he's agreeing with anything like 45 or lower.
Yeah.
But as you know, Bill's not expressed an opinion on these issues at all.
Yeah.
Ever, has he?
Yeah.
Did he vote for 40 to 50 or?
He supported the last draft.
That's
He
right.
supported my recommendations, yeah.
He supported your draft, right, which is draft 6.
He also supported your draft 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So I've never got a good reading on it. Okay.
Yeah, and, well, and the Public Service Commission is actually, it sounds like, comfortable with this discussion at different level, or?
I'm comfortable looking at the European night noise guidelines averaged over the year, as a staffer, and I haven't run this up the chain yet to see if I can vote on it yet, but I think in order to go stricter than the World Health Organization, I'm going to have to have good evidence.
I don't think we're asking for stricter than the World Health, because that's what's 40 dB level. Again, are you relating to the average over the year versus something? Do you have any idea what it would be measured over shorter periods of time? Because I don't.
Well, I don't know either, but I have talked to people who say it's definitely higher than 40, and that when, and when people see this 40, they think, oh, that's the maximum it can ever be, which means that, so I just want to make sure that we're not doing something, basing it on the World Health Organization.
I do understand that.
When we don't have the justification. And I also wanted to ask, you commented that, that there have been other projects, wind farms with complaints, and I wondered if,
well, not necessarily in Michigan. I'm not any more familiar with Michigan projects than I am other projects that have been done or developed in other states of the U.S. But I've read affidavits. I've read court testimony, and I sent you one long
Vermont
testimony
case.
from Vermont, a case in Vermont, that pretty well summarized some of the issues. Again, from a legal, not a scientific per se point of view. They included, I think, some scientific notions and studies, but it was more from the legal. What holds up in court when people protest? And I know it was a long piece that you probably didn't want to read the whole 100+ pages, 185 pages or whatever, but there was a summary of that. I hope everybody would read it. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's the kind of evidence I'm talking about.
Yeah, and that's kind of confusing, because that was the brief provided by one side, and then I went back and read
That's right.
the public.
Each
I
side
think
has
it's
its
the
own
Public
view.
Service Commission's brief, and it was very different.
Mhm.
So it's just.
Do you think, talking to you guys here, do you think it would be helpful to open up for discussion from the public members who are here, some of their reactions to some of the things we've been talking about? Are we going to really make it to a point of adopting, before we adopt any particular draft, whether it's 6 or the one that Ken came up with that we've been mostly discussing today? It might be helpful to hear from people who particularly might have views about the very things we're talking about, as opposed to some of the things maybe they came prepared to talk about, if you know what I mean. Is that, I have, I think 9 people, about 9 people who said they wanted to comment. I happen to know a name on here, Rick James. You didn't indicate, Rick, that you
No,
wanted
but
to
I would
comment.
at this point.
But I know you have some views
I would
on
at this
a lot of these issues. But I don't want to give anybody preference here. But do you think, as a committee, it would be helpful to hear some?
Well, I think, you know, we had a lot of public comment last time, and we just put off reaching some kind of
Right.
final decision. There's a long comment period once we come up with anything, assuming we come up
Okay.
with something. And I would like us to come up with something.
Well, you know,
So I guess that was a
feel
no.
honestly, this
That was
is
my,
this is as good as we're going to get in terms of consensus at this point
Well, you know, there is
on the noise issue.
there's one possible scenario too, right, which is, you mentioned, Ken, we're sending this out for comment, and we can have specific meetings or hearings or whatever, for public comment too, in addition to written comments. If we lay out different standards in the rationale, and we get feedback from folks, we may get additional information and change our minds. And we may get to where I think we all want to, we would like to get, which is a consensus recommendation. So maybe the fact that we can't achieve consensus today, maybe is not the end of the story. Who knows?
Well, I mean, we can put out this version, incorporate it into the larger document.
Yeah.
Let me just divert a minute attention to another issue. We have 4 sections in this document: physical safety, shadow flicker, noise limits, and conflict resolution. Last meeting, we spent a lot of time on conflict resolution, and that was the nature of the discussion from the public members, the public independent. Do you think this document is pretty well wrapped up for purposes of a compromise that we can agree on in those other 3 areas, including the information that Mark Clevey, you know, included for the conflict resolution in the last draft?
I think so.
Yeah.
I feel that's largely true.
Sorry.
Maybe not.
So my only issue with the conflict resolution is that there's not, I don't see, it's not clear cut to me. So I live in the area, I think that the wind turbine is not complying with the noise regulations or some aspect of the regulation. I don't see how other than I go out and measure it or hire somebody to do the measurements, I don't see how somebody can check to see if they're in compliance. I just don't see that in, I mean, I gotta go to an arbitrator. Well, what's the arbitrator's not taking measurements? I know, John, you're listed as an arbitrator, you don't do measurements.
Mediator.
Mediator, sorry,
Right.
difference, I guess, okay, that just shows my ignorance about that. But I don't see, just in terms of somebody, we're not talking about it's 45 safe, or 40 safe. We're just talking about, is the wind turbine within the municipality's regulations, and how is that checked?